Hi there. Thanks for joining me on Rethink Real Estate for Good. I'm Eve Picker, and I'm on a mission to make real estate work for everyone. I love real estate. Real estate makes places good or bad, rich or poor, beautiful or not. In this show, I'm interviewing the disruptors, those creative thinkers and doers that are shrugging off the status quo in order to build better for everyone. If you haven't already, check out all of my podcasts at our website, rethinkrealestateforgood.co, or you can find them at your favorite podcast station. You'll find lots worth listening to, I'm sure. Tracy Gabriel works at repairing urban environments. She's president and executive director of the National Landing Bid. There she puts her experience as urbanist, planner, and placemaker to work, leading the makeover of Virginia's largest downtown, with over $8 billion in private investment in the pipeline. Crystal City was designed with the best of intentions and the best of planning principles in the 1970s. It's a car-centric place, spotted with pedestrian tunnels and underground malls. It's Tracy's job to turn this inward-looking place into an outward-looking one. Walkable, livable, and vibrant at street level is the goal. It's quite a tall order. For a woman who is committed to addressing complex urban challenges and building great neighborhoods, this is the ultimate role. If you'd like to join me in my quest to rethink real estate, there are two simple things you can do. Share this podcast and go to rethinkrealestateforgood.co, where you can subscribe to be the first to hear about my podcasts and blog posts. Hello, Tracy. I'm really excited to hear about your work today.
Eve, I'm so happy to be here.
So, a really big question. How do you transform a very large neighborhood built for the car with underground pathways into a paradigm for 21st century urban centers?
Well, that is our grand challenge. So if you aren't familiar with it, we're talking about the National Landing area, which is comprised of Pentagon City, Crystal City, and Potomac Yard in Arlington, Virginia, just minutes from downtown DC, Washington, DC. And, this area came to fruition during the 60s and 70s with a very, auto-centric sensibility. We had actually like urban density, drivable density, but the sensibility was one of inverted or introverted buildings, mega blocks, retaining walls, just a hostile environment for pedestrians.
And I read underground retail too. So
our underground, exactly. It's again that introverted nature of the buildings, and we know today that it's so critical for our urban centers that we actually are competing on place and the experience of place. And so much of that is about walkability. It's about street level activity. It's about engaging storefronts. It's about interesting businesses that create authenticity and the identity of place. As we're looking at sustainability, it's also about green and bringing nature into our urban environments. It's about having every mode, right, of access and getting around. So we are trying to, right now in the National Landing area, is take that 60s and 70s paradigm and turn it on its head. And actually our goal is to become the most connected downtown in the country. It's very ambitious.
That's a pretty big goal. Yeah.
It is a big goal. How do you do it? You asked the question. You do it through very good planning, First off, I think someone who comes from an urban planning background, I've appreciated how much our local jurisdiction has focused on planning and important inflection points, including a plan just approved this past weekend, and the idea of actually planning for growth. And through that growth and development, making those on the ground changes to our urban infrastructure that really have a people-centered transformation at its heart. So whether that's block by block, buildings that now have activated retail and storefronts, it's reclaiming streets for multiple modes and for people. It's about extroverting our buildings, even repositioning our existing portfolio buildings and making them have the kind of urban sensibilities that we have today. And of course, it's investment in new infrastructure, parks,
Right.
connected to place, and then actual transportation options that are really about next generation mobility.
I love the idea of going from introvert to extrovert for a city. That's a great way to describe it. But let's start talking first about the actual national landing bid. What is that and why was it formed?
The National Landing Bid was formed back in 2006 as the Crystal City Business Improvement District. And it was really in response to base realignment and closure and the shrinking of the federal sector locally. Bids are often, come in at the moment where an area needs extra place management.
And BID stands for Business Improvement District, right?
Yes, and just to tell what a business improvement district is, it's a public-private partnership, financed by property owners to focus on, the vibrancy and vitality of a central business district or downtown. And the focus has typically been around clean and safe and business attraction. And I think what's different for, the National Landing Bid is that we are really focused on being placemakers, storytellers, ideas generators, and community builders.
Who are the major players in the bid?
Yeah.
I mean, I know we have a bid locally here in Pittsburgh, and I know they exist everywhere and they all function a little differently. So what was the idea behind this particular bid and who pushed it forward?
Yes. So we expanded 3 years ago and then became the National Landing Bid. So we increased our geography to reflect the entire downtown. But it came on the heels of the announcement of Amazon locating its HQ2 in our area, which, in truth, it was a longstanding goal of our area to expand the bid to reflect our entire downtown. And I think with the advent of Amazon coming to the area and the opportunity to actually unify our district, it was really an essential moment to see the importance of a bid in managing change and growth in the area and having a local steward for our business owners and our property owners.
It sounds like this might be one of the largest bids in the country.
In terms of a budget, we're just about $5 million, which is probably mid-sized. But I think what we have going for us in terms of biggest is, I think, the biggest transformation underway.
Okay.
We have, $8 billion in private sector investment, of which many people have read about the $2.5 billion that Amazon is bringing to the area. We are a downtown that is comparable in scale to downtown Oakland or downtown Austin. We're set to be at downtown Miami soon, and we'll continue to grow from there. So I think it's the notable component of our downtown is just how much change is underway in terms of the pipeline of investment and the emphasis on innovation and the repairing of the urban experience is what is a distinguishing feature of our area.
So when you repair the urban experience and there's this focus on transformation, what does that look like for residents or for workers or for retail activities?
Yes, repairing the urban fabric is all about, I think, stitching together our area more seamlessly. I think what we know is that walkability is increasingly important, as is having spaces for surprise and delight and respite in an urban environment. We know that during the pandemic, how important that is. So the kind of ease of getting around, the ability to have everything that you need in one district, to be able to access the small businesses that you love, to shop, to eat locally. So that's all part of the transformation. It's really about a live-work balance. I think one of the things we also know is that monolithic places don't feel great. And I think building a place in terms of the urban repair, it's about balancing the mix of uses and ensuring that workers and residents and live work is in abundance.
So just tell us in detail, what have been the residential and workplace transformations? What's been built so far? What's been accomplished to date? And what's still being planned? It's probably a really long list. So
one of the things we're seeing, and as we speak, I am looking at several cranes right across the street from me. And what we're seeing is sort of a block by block transformation now. Some are, rehabbing of existing buildings. To again go back to our first metaphor of extroverting buildings, we're seeing retail that was once internalized being brought to the street front, bringing more green on a block by block basis. Just recently, we reclaimed the front door to our neighborhood, our metro system, made that into really a park experience as people come out of our metro. And so we are building lots of new housing. So we already have 26,000 residents, but each new building in the past 10 years has added to mostly our residential stock. And we have about 7,000 more units already approved and set to be constructed. Okay. So we'll be actually the fastest growing residential neighborhood in the Washington, D.C. area.
And what about from a zoning point of view? Have you made any changes? I asked this question because I was really impressed by a neighborhood in Australia a few years back where they had just left industrial and retail and residential sort of all mixed up, and it was an incredibly vibrant place. It was, really the sort of a very enticing idea to live in a place like that, rather than segregated into a neighborhood.
Absolutely. So I mentioned that good planning has been at the heart of the faith in a blueprint for sustainable growth, for yielding the kind of environments we want to live in. And one example of that is the fact that in the plans, there has been incredible intentionality in retaining a 50-50 balance between office and housing. And in some ways, I think the Arlington County, our local jurisdiction, was ahead of its time, because what we're discovering now is that, office markets that are just office are feeling very underloved at the moment.
The pain, yeah.
In pain.
Absolutely.
And there's cascading effects where retail can't survive in that environment. Right. So the fortunate thing that we have here is that we've planned for that balance, and we actually have a 1-to-1 ratio at present between jobs and housing. And we're going to continue that with all the growth and development. We'll continue to have that 1-to-1 ratio, that ideal balance between jobs and housing. And why is that important? It means that our streets are going to have people on them, no matter what the back to office environment or, the new work experience for everyone is, that we will have a vibrant, very characteristically urban place. And we'll be able to sustain the small businesses that, again, are the lifeblood of how people experience and identify with place as that on the ground street level activity.
I imagine that you're also able to reduce the amount of parking and the number of cars being used when you have that sort of relationship, right?
Absolutely. You can reduce that, and you want there to be walkable trips to do most of what we have. The other benefit we have locally is that we are investing in the larger scale transformation of transportation assets. So how do you make it super easy for anyone who lives here or works here to get anywhere else in the region? And so there's been a lot of investment in big infrastructure in terms of how we are going to connect people to where they want to live or work, but also then focusing very locally on the micro mobility, the human scaled streets. But how do you get the last mile that you need to get in? And I think, yes, we are overbuilt in terms of parking. Again, we came of age at a time where it was very auto-centric, and we have lots of empty garages, so much so that we annually have a bike race in our garages on the
cool.
3 lower floors that are not used on weekdays, So it just shows you, we know that we are overbuilt, and we actually only, I think, 20% of our trips are single occupancy vehicles. So we are extremely transit oriented in how people go to and from our area. And I think the way people want to live is to be able to take some individualized, maybe a scooter, maybe their bike, or maybe walking to this. And we can offer, our goal is to be able to offer seamless ways to do any of that.
Interesting. So what's going to happen to all those empty garages? Are they going to be torn down, converted into lofts? Like what's the goal?
Very interesting, because if you look, there's so much complexity, because one of the things that we have going on here is that we have a lot of concentrated ownership, and that's historically, it's changed hands, but the portfolio has stayed largely intact, which means you have multiple buildings sitting on large parking garages. So very complex urban infrastructure when you don't have the garages just tied to one building, but you have the fortunate circumstance that with large scale property owners, they can make investments that are transformative because they see the value to the entire portfolio. So what the future of our underground is that you mentioned before, the underground retail, what the future of our garages are, I think are yet to be seen. But I think what we know is that we need more of the street-oriented retail and less of the parking garages, and more multimodal options. And I think having what we have is an asset, but we don't need more.
Right. Interesting. So I have to ask, who decides on how to rebuild this place? Is this a top-down project, or is the community involved?
We have one of the most engaged local communities. I'm so impressed. As an urban planner myself, my history and work experience has been largely in community-based planning. So I've always been on the public side of the planning equation, doing that engagement. And the thing that strikes me locally is just how engaged. As I mentioned, we have a number of plans that were community-based plans, but we've even had the community go further to create their own plans around livability and joint visions beyond even. So a lot of bottom-up planning. And we're seeing how that has dovetailed into the plans for the county. Ideas like green ribbons going through our neighborhoods, green networks tying together our places have came up from the community and have made it to our plans. And of course, during the development review process, it is a case study in community conversation over the scale and the benefits of development. So I think one of the unique things with that level of engagement and involvement and the amount of planning, and what is pretty exceptional in this area, is just how much commensurate investment in parks, in transportation, in great design is able to be achieved, which could mean that growth actually can equal greater livability, which isn't always the case. And I think so much of that is because of the robust dialogue about how you balance development with the needs of who's living here.
Interesting. So what does the demographic look like there?
In our downtown area, we have about 26,000 residents. And like much of Arlington County, we probably skew pretty heavily in a millennial demographic. So a lot of folks in early to mid-career. And but we have the full gamut. We have a lot of people who have naturally occurring retirement communities here as well. People who moved here at the outset. And then from a diversity perspective is something that the BID has been really passionate about, is making sure that we retain the diversity that we do have. We are in a very diverse region. Washington, D.C. is the metro area is a minority majority region, and that is a quintessential component of what great cities are, is having great diversity. And we're very interested in not just retaining, but also growing, making this an inclusive place that is really for everyone. And as you know, I think affordability always is the greatest challenge to ensuring that we retain the diversity that we do have.
That was going to be my next question. How is affordable housing part of this mix?
I think one of the things that we know is that the perils of growth and development are really what it can potentially do to an already existing affordable housing crisis. I think we have two parallel things happening. One is just growing the inventory of housing generally as a release valve. So I mentioned we have a lot of units in production, and it is a hope that helps to deliver on the demand that exists. Additionally, unfortunately, we started off here with a baseline that there wasn't very many committed affordable housing units. But that has been a joint focus of the county, of our property owners, of Amazon, to up the focus on affordable housing. And that's incrementally on a project by project basis on what they can deliver in terms of affordable housing, either on site or through funding for affordable housing. And then there were game changer investments. We had the fortunate circumstance of being Amazon's Housing Equity Fund, which is a $2 billion fund. Their very first initial investment was in a property that's just a block from their current campus. And that through the Washington Housing Conservancy turned an existing housing development into what will be long-term affordable housing, especially workforce housing over time. So those kind of investments, where that's to the scale of like 800 units and potentially another 800 units that go with the infill development around it, we have 1,600 units that are within or will be within a block from a major job center.
Yeah.
I think it's that combination of policy, of incremental steps towards affordable housing, and then, and we're fortunate to have this, kind of the game changer, large scale investments that really, change the conversation and change the metrics that we could accomplish.
Yeah, I suppose that's always the worry. Like the more gorgeous you make a place, the more unaffordable the housing becomes, and 800 units just seems to kind of scratch the surface. It's a problem that
absolutely
every country is having. So
yeah,
I don't know how you solve it.
Yeah, the other issue that exists broadly in the housing market is just that predominantly in our market, it's almost all rental. And that's a product of the fact that we mostly have REITs here and other things, and just historically what has been built. And so opportunities for kind of multifamily condos and home ownership hasn't been in abundance. And in terms of zoning, I think tackling some of the single family areas to see what other missing middle housing can get developed is also a joint effort.
I think DC's had a pretty transitory population too, right? Which has kind of pushed it towards more rental than ownership. What I understand, I don't know. So tell me the really big things that you're excited about for the next 5 years, and maybe even the next 10 years.
I'm excited on multiple fronts, but I mentioned before, I'm excited about, a people-oriented transformation. We actually, as a bid, have tried to be the spokesperson for that transformation. And we have a People Before Cars campaign. We have a People Before Cars coalition, bringing together transit advocates to really elevate the conversation. And we have $4 billion in transportation projects in our area. $4 billion. It's an astounding number. That includes big rail that can seamlessly connect our region, transformation of our airport, which is actually adjacent to our district. And one of those projects that we're talking about is a big idea that the bid spawned, and that's a pedestrian or multimodal connection to the airport from the airport to our main street, which will be a 5+ minute walk.
Oh, wow.
And is currently in the planning and will be in the design phase going forward. So things like that, where we will go from maybe a hidden edge city to the only downtown in the country where you can walk a comfortable and attractive walk to an airport in 5 minutes.
Wow. That's pretty significant.
Yeah.
All those funds, federal dollars, where do the funds come from? The $4 billion?
It's a mix, right? So some of it is state and federal on the big rail projects. Some of it is, state on our rail and multimodal facilities, and other ones are the complete streets projects, and the kind of human scaled work is being done by our county. So it is a rich tapestry of transportation funding sources, but also we have public-private partnerships to execute new metro station entrances and the like. So many players, and which is why we had put together a report called Mobility Next, because there were so many different actors doing different projects that to see the complete picture, you could understand the scale of the impact of those investments. And quite honestly, from the standpoint of the bid, the thing I'm excited about is to be one of those ideas champions and be able to kind of push the envelope on what it can mean to have people-oriented infrastructure. So we're quite excited about that. I personally am excited to see, hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, in our role as a steward, is to hope that we can have shared benefits of all this development. I think we are a case study in urban development and urban transformations, given the pace and scale of what we're experiencing, and how we do it and how well we do it will be a measure and hopefully a model for how this can get done. And so we've been very focused at the bid and amongst our stakeholders in having conversations around everything from racial equity to how do we build an inclusive community. And
right.
So I'm hopeful that we see advances there. And I think on the horizon, I think that we could have a real innovation district, a hub of activity between Amazon, and we have the Virginia Tech Innovation Campus to the south. So we're really kind of interested in seeing what a living lab of innovation might be in our area.
So, what I love about this is that I think the powers that be understand that this is a really long-term hold on investment, but eventually there'll be a return, right? And it's not going to be in a year, but it's going to be worthwhile because that's a pretty big investment to make. That's me thinking like a developer.
Yes, no, absolutely. And it's precisely that. It's that, being able to think about the future and the impact and, what the benefits can be and the return on investment.
I'm going to just move to you now. You've always been a planner. And what led you to this career?
I would say planning is somewhat in my blood. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. I was raised in Manhattan, lived on the 21st floor of an apartment building, a rent stabilized unit that my parents still live in. But I probably spent a lot of, maybe too much time dreaming, staring out my window at the cityscape and being a kind of a voracious observer of city life. So it built a passion for cities in terms of their form, function, energy, but also I think cities are the top expression of community living. And so I really also am interested in community and urban policy. And so, what is the well-being of city dwellers has also been kind of front of mind. But I think that foundation and that passion was born out of my experience as being.
It sounds like you're living your dream.
Yes, it is a dream role.
Yes. So where did you work before taking on this particular project?
It's funny that I feel like taking on growth, and change or being able to talk about and have conversations and convene around managing change, around discussing what is a best community outcome for an area. That has been part of, I think, a through line in my career, because I realized that if we're going to have a sustainable future, growth is not optional in certain places. Is if you have great infrastructure, then we need to build around it. So many of the places in my career have been in a state of growth or re-envisioning. And so before this role, I was focused on neighborhood planning for all of Washington, D.C. So a community-based planning role, really trying to think at the start of what equity-driven planning might be and design forward planning. So was talking to, doing all the work throughout the neighborhoods in DC. It was a time of, I think, demographic shifts and lots of development. And so I think that community conversation and upping the bar for engagement and just,
Right.
doing more to outreach to people and have a community conversation was a big part of my role in development. And prior to that, I worked at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And again, I think that was kind of an era of take it or leave it, a lot of mega project thinking, but some of those are around big ideas for affordable housing. So I worked on the Queens portfolio, a central business
Right.
district projects, and on projects like Hunters Point South, which again, are a combination of affordable housing and parks, and how do you create growth in existing neighborhoods.
I just want to ask one final question. A project like this makes me wonder, or a goal like this makes me wonder what went wrong in the first place. And it makes me wonder, what's being built today that we'll have to fix in 20 or 30 years. And I'm sure you've thought about that. I think about that a lot when I see projects emerge in the urban landscape. Some are pretty horrifying. I mean, how can we ensure, or can we ensure, that the places we build today will work for many years to come?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. How do you future-proof? And
Yeah.
and how can you identify your blind spots in the moment? I often ask that question to myself. I even think that right now, urban planning lacks a paradigm to work through some of this, because I think the mantra of community engagement has always been an essential component of that, and the idea of revitalization. But right now, we're in an era where we need to know what that next thing is. It's really about equity in planning, about inclusion, about growth, about really attacking systemically the affordable housing crisis. I think that planning is lacking that toolbox to really tackle that. So I think we know some of the places where we have blind spots, like as you mentioned, the affordability that we're achieving is a drop in the bucket for what the overarching need is. Having a focus that's predominantly on rental doesn't have the diversity of options that you would want. And then, of course, I think we're already living this now, is like thinking about street level activity is so important, but you can't have ground level activity everywhere, because it kind of erodes the ability to be able to attract it, and not every place can sustain it. So making sure that when we think about how important that is to us, that we're actually more targeted about where that goes, and it doesn't have to be everywhere. I think there's a growing understanding of that, but I think there will always be misses, and then we'll have vacant storefronts and trouble. And of course, future-proofing the future of office is something I think we're all trying to muddle through and discern what the changes in workforce and kind of what is the permanency of COVID-related shifts in behavior, and what will that mean for the future of office going forward.
I really appreciate what you're doing, and I especially appreciate it because I worked for a planning department for a while, and I think you are probably an extrovert, which is why you're able to drag this place from introvert to extrovert. I'm an introvert, and I found it very difficult managing community engagement. I mean, you haven't talked about that much, but that is a really tough part of the job because people are so scared of change. You're in the role of having to convince them, right?
Yeah. I think that one of the things that is a little bit different here. And there's an incredible appetite for community engagement and conversation. We might have meetings like nearly every night, even virtually in this virtual context.
Oh, wow.
But I think that the thing that is very heartening is just how much alignment there is in terms of what people want as goals and outcomes, and where that aligns between the community and the business community, and then the county's planners. There's so much alignment about what is good for residents and community is actually good for business. So retail, parks, great transportation, walkability, vibrancy, these are all things that affordability. We want to live in richly textured places, and those are actually the places that perform well. So I feel like the alignment that exists between, having the same goals of what some of what success means is so critical.
So it makes your job a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And the next time I'm down in DC, I'm going to be heading over to Crystal City and all the other places and checking it out. It sounds amazing.
Well, we'd love to have you, Peggy. So thanks so much.
Thank you. That was Tracy Gabriel. Tracy loves cities. She's had a remarkable career as an urbanist, planner, and placemaker, committed to addressing complex urban challenges and building great neighborhoods. Now she's turning her passion towards the remaking of Virginia's largest downtown. We can't wait to see the final outcome. You can find out more about this episode or others you might have missed on the show notes page at our website, rethinkrealestateforgood.co. There's lots to listen to there. A special thanks to David Allardyce for his excellent editing of this podcast and original music. And thanks to you for spending your time with me today. We'll talk again soon, but for now, this is Eve Picker signing off to go make some change.